You've been here, what, 2 months? And now you're throwing away your job, your safety, everything. For me? Because you're the first person in 3 years who's treated me like a human being instead of a bank account or a charity case. Because you bring me dinner and remember my coffee and notice when I'm tired. Because you dream of oceans and deserve to see them. Because watching your family trade you like property made me realize that some things are worth more than maintaining a convenient lie. He couldn't say any of that, so instead he said, because it was the right thing to do. Hannah was quiet for a long moment. Then, softly, nobody's ever done the right thing for me before. Not when it cost them something. Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He thought about his penthouse in Chicago, his company, his carefully insulated life where doing the right thing was always convenient because money made everything negotiable. Beside him, Hannah had curled into herself, her eyes closed but her breathing too irregular for sleep. We should rest, he said gently. Figure out our next move in the morning. Our next move? She laughed again, that same broken sound. Luke, there is no next move. We can't run forever. I have no money, no skills that matter outside a farm, nowhere to go. And you just gave up your job for someone you barely know. This is insane. Maybe. He shifted to face her. But it's the right kind of insane. There's no right kind of insane. Sure there is. It's the kind where you choose someone's safety over your own convenience. The kind where you do something because it's right, not because it's easy. Hannah opened her eyes, studying him in the darkness. Who are you, Luke Carter? Really? The question hit like a physical blow. Daniel felt the truth pressing against his teeth, demanding release. This would be the moment. The moment of truth arrived earlier than he'd expected, and far more complicated than he'd imagined. Daniel could lie, could deflect, redirect, maintain the comfortable fiction, could be Luke Carter for a while longer, the broke single dad who'd stumbled into heroism by accident. Or he could respect Hannah enough to give her honesty, even if it shattered everything. I'm someone who came to Iowa looking for something I'd lost, he said slowly, choosing each word carefully. I'm someone who was tired of being valued for the wrong reasons. I'm someone who wanted to know if anyone could see past circumstances to the person underneath. He met her eyes. And you did, Hannah. You saw me. The real me, underneath all the rest of it. But you're hiding something. Yes. Something big. Yes. She waited, giving him space to elaborate. When he didn't, she asked, Are you dangerous? A criminal? No, God no, nothing like that. Then what? Daniel opened his mouth, closed it. Daniel felt the weight of that luck, the privilege of having people who'd help without demanding explanations. It was a kind of wealth Hannah had never experienced, and the unfairness of it sat heavy in his chest. They reached Evanston by early afternoon, pulling up to a modest townhouse in a quiet neighborhood that screamed upper-middle-class stability. Daniel retrieved the key, let them inside, and immediately felt the cognitive dissonance of being Luke Carter in a space that belonged to Daniel Reed's world. The furniture was tasteful but not ostentatious, the kind of place Marcus used for overflow guests when his main house was full. But compared to Hannah's life, compared to Luke Carter's supposed circumstances, it might as well have been a palace. Hannah stood in the entryway, taking in the hardwood floors, the modern kitchen visible through an archway, the artwork on the walls that was probably original, though not showy about it. Your friend has money, she observed. Are you rich? This question was so direct, so unexpected, that Daniel actually laughed before he could stop himself. What? Are you rich? She repeated. Is that what you're hiding? Because this... She gestured at the townhouse. This isn't normal broke person behavior. Having friends who own property like this, knowing how to handle crises like some kind of professional problem solver. The way you carry yourself, the way you talk sometimes when you forget to be Luke Carter, struggling farmhand. Her eyes were sharp now, analytical. You're performing poverty, aren't you? Daniel felt the floor drop out from under him. This was it. The reckoning he'd been avoiding arrived ahead of schedule and sharper than he'd prepared for. He could lie, could maintain the fiction a little longer, could buy himself time to figure out how to explain without losing her. But Hannah deserved better than more lies. Yes, he said quietly. I'm rich. He sank onto the couch, put his head in his hands, and finally let himself acknowledge what he'd done. He'd lied to Hannah, manipulated her circumstances, used his resources to create a false reality where he could play at hardship while actual struggling people suffered real consequences. He'd risked her safety, her future, her trust, all in service of his own selfish need to feel authentic. And worst of all, he'd fallen in love with her, really, truly in love, which meant he'd trapped them both in an impossible situation. Because how could she trust his feelings when they'd grown from lies? How could she separate the truth from the manipulation? How could she ever believe that what he felt was real when everything else had been theater? His phone buzzed. Sarah, calling for the third time today, each voicemail more worried than the last. Daniel knew he needed to call her, needed to talk to Ethan, needed to stop avoiding his actual life. But he couldn't face it yet. Because if she finds that out later, if she discovers you abandoned your kid for this experiment, she'll never forgive you. Daniel's stomach twisted. I didn't abandon him. Sarah's taking excellent care. Doesn't matter. You chose this experiment over your son. That's going to be a problem. What do I do, Marcus? Honestly, I don't know. This is above my pay grade. But I do know you can't keep lying. Not to her, not to yourself, not to Ethan. You've got to come clean about all of it and then let her decide if she can forgive you. And you've got to deal with the fact that she might not. After they hung up, Daniel sat in the darkening townhouse watching the sun set through expensive windows and understood that he'd reached a crisis point. Not the dramatic action movie kind where heroes made bold choices and saved the day. The quiet, devastating kind where you realized you'd been the villain of your own story all along. Night fell completely, and Daniel remained on the couch, unable to move, unable to think beyond the magnitude of what he'd destroyed. Around 10 o'clock, he heard footsteps on the stairs. Hannah descended slowly, her face composed but her eyes red-rimmed and swollen. She'd changed into clothes she must have found in one of the guest room closets, a simple t-shirt and sweatpants that were too large for her frame, making her look smaller, more vulnerable than ever. She sat in the armchair across from him, maintaining careful distance, and for several minutes neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't comfortable or companionable like it had been in the barn during inventory counts. This silence was a living thing, dense with hurt and confusion and questions neither of them knew how to ask. Finally, Hannah said, I've been trying to understand, trying to make it make sense in my head, and I keep coming back to the same question. My family's losing their farm, Daniel. They're drowning in debt. And you were there the whole time with the means to help, but you chose not to because it would have interfered with your authenticity experiment? It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? Explain it to me, because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you used my family's desperation as a backdrop for your personal journey of self-discovery. The accusation hit hard because it was fundamentally true. Daniel had inserted himself into their crisis without acknowledging his power to end it. He'd watched Hannah work herself to exhaustion, managing impossible finances while he possessed the ability to erase those problems with a phone call. He'd observed her family's dysfunction and desperation and treated it like research material for his own emotional growth. You're right, he said quietly. I used your situation. I used you. And I'm sorry, Hannah. I'm so deeply sorry. Sorry doesn't fix anything. She pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. Sorry doesn't change the fact that you lied to me every single day. That every conversation we had, every moment I thought we were connecting, you were performing, playing a role, being Luke Carter, the broke single dad I could relate to, while the real you was somewhere else entirely. The real me was exactly who you saw, Daniel insisted. The feelings were real, Hannah. The conversations, the connection, the way I felt when you brought me dinner or asked about Ethan, that was all real. I wasn't performing emotion, I was just hiding circumstances. You can't separate them like that. Hannah's voice broke slightly. The circumstances are part of who you are. Your wealth, your privilege, your resources. Those shape how you move through the world, how you make decisions, what risks you can take. Luke Carter would never have been able to drive me away from my family like you did last night. Luke Carter wouldn't have had a friend with a townhouse to hide in. Luke Carter wouldn't have had the confidence to stand up to my father because Luke Carter would have been too afraid of losing his job, his housing, his survival. She wiped at her eyes angrily. You weren't being authentic. You were playing dress-up with poverty while keeping all your real power hidden in reserve. Daniel wanted to argue, to defend himself, to explain that his loneliness was real even if his circumstances weren't. But she was right. He'd been playing a game where he controlled all the rules, where he could end the experiment whenever it became too uncomfortable, where his safety net remained intact even as he pretended to walk a tightrope. What do you want me to say? He asked finally. That I'm privileged? I am. That I abused that privilege by treating your life like a social experiment? I did. That I should have been honest from the beginning? I should have. But Hannah, I can't undo any of it. I can't take back the lies or the manipulation or the ways I hurt you. All I can do is be honest now and try to make things right going forward. How? The word came out desperate. How do you make this right? I ran away from my family with a man who doesn't exist. I have no money, no job, nowhere to go. My family is probably calling the police right now, reporting me as kidnapped or brainwashed or... She stopped, a horrible realization crossing her face. They're going to tell Ashford where I am. They're going to help him find me because he's their solution, their way out of debt. And you... She looked at him with something between pity and contempt. You can protect yourself. You have money and lawyers and power. But what about me? What happens to me when your guilt wears off and you go back to your real life? The question hung between them like an indictment. What did happen to Hannah when Daniel inevitably returned to Chicago, to Ethan, to Reed Agricultural Holdings and penthouse apartments, and the life he'd temporarily abandoned? He'd saved her from one terrible situation, but what had he saved her for? He couldn't keep her hidden in Marcus's townhouse forever. She needed a life, a future, stability that didn't depend on Daniel's continued guilt and intervention. I won't abandon you, he said. I promise, Hannah. Whatever happens, wherever you want to go, whatever you need, I'll make sure you're safe and stable. I'll help you build a life that's yours, not dependent on me or anyone else. More promises. Hannah laughed without humor. How am I supposed to trust your promises when everything else was a lie? Because I'm not lying now. Because I'm telling you the complete truth, even the parts that make me look terrible. Because I'm giving you all the power here. You decide what happens next, where we go from here, whether you want me involved in your life at all. That's not power, she said softly. That's just you offloading responsibility. You want me to make the decisions so if things go wrong, you can tell yourself you were just respecting my choices. Daniel felt like he'd been punched. She was right again, seeing through his careful language to the self-protection underneath. He'd framed his offer as empowerment, when really it was just another way of avoiding accountability. Okay, he said, forcing himself to be more direct. Then here's what I think should happen, and you can agree or tell me I'm wrong. I think you should stay here for now, somewhere safe where your family and Ashford can't reach you. I think we should get you a lawyer, a real one, someone who can help you understand your legal options and make sure your family can't force you into anything. I think we should figure out what you actually want to do with your life, not what your family needs from you or what I think you should want, but what you genuinely want for yourself. And then I think we should make a plan to get you there, using whatever resources necessary, including mine. Hannah studied him carefully. And what do you get out of this plan? Nothing. I get nothing. This isn't about me. Everything's been about you so far. Why would this be different? Because I love you. The words escaped before Daniel could stop them, raw and unpolished. I love you, Hannah. And I know I have no right to that feeling. I know I built it on lies and manipulation. I know you probably hate me right now, and you should. But I love you anyway. And that means I want what's best for you, even if that doesn't include me. Even if you decide you never want to see me again after this, I still want you to have the life you deserve, the ocean you dreamed about, the freedom to choose, everything. Tears spilled down Hannah's cheeks again, but her voice remained steady. You don't get to love me, Daniel. You don't get to make this a romance when it's really about your guilt and your need to be the hero. I'm not some damsel you rescued. I'm a person whose life you complicated, whose trust you violated, whose future is now uncertain because you decided to play at poverty and then got in too deep. I know. Do you? Do you really understand what you've done? You didn't just lie to me. You made me feel seen for the first time in my life, made me believe someone actually cared about me as a person, and then revealed it was all based on deception. That's not romance. That's cruelty. Daniel felt something break inside his chest. You're right. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. They sat in painful silence, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on them. Finally, Hannah uncurled from the chair, standing slowly like her body hurt. I'm going back to bed. I need more time to think. Of course. She started toward the stairs, then paused. Daniel? Yes? Tomorrow, I want to meet your son. The request caught him completely off guard. What? You say Ethan is real, that he's the most important thing in your world. I want to meet him. I want to see who you actually are when you're being a father, not Luke Carter or Daniel Reed the billionaire. I want to see if there's anything authentic underneath all the lies. Daniel's throat tightened. The thought of introducing Hannah to Ethan while everything was so broken between them felt dangerous, like exposing his son to collateral damage. But he also understood what she was asking. She needed proof that something about him was real, that the man who talked about his child with such obvious love actually existed. Okay, he said quietly. Tomorrow, I'll call Sarah and arrange it. Hannah nodded and disappeared upstairs. Daniel remained on the couch, staring at the ceiling, wondering how he'd reached this point. Somewhere in Chicago, Ethan was probably asleep, secure in Sarah's care, but missing his father. Somewhere in Iowa, Hannah's family was probably strategizing with Ashford, planning how to retrieve their valuable asset. And here Daniel sat, having destroyed the careful compartments he'd built around his life, with no clear path forward and no idea how to fix what he'd broken. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Tom Miller. You stole my daughter. The police are looking for both of you. Turn yourselves in before this gets worse. Daniel showed the text to Marcus when his friend called back an hour later. They're threatening police involvement. Hannah was right. They're going to paint this as kidnapping. Was she forced to leave? Marcus asked. No, she came willingly. I asked her directly if I was kidnapping her, and she said no. Then you're fine legally. She's an adult. She can go wherever she wants with whomever she wants. Her family has no legal standing to force her back. What about Ashford? He's rich, connected. Can he make trouble? Potentially, but for what? There's no legal marriage contract, no binding agreement. He was trying to buy a person, Daniel. That's not enforceable. The worst they can do is make noise, threaten civil suits for interference, but none of it will stick. Relief flooded through Daniel, but it was temporary. Legal safety didn't address the real problems. Hannah's broken trust, his son's abandonment, the massive lie he'd built his entire Iowa experience on. I'm bringing Ethan to meet Hannah tomorrow, he said quietly. Marcus was silent for a moment. Is that wise, given how unstable everything is? Probably not. But she asked to meet him. She wants to see if anything about me is real. Daniel, Ethan's 6. He doesn't understand nuance. If he sees you with Hannah, he's going to assume she's important. And if this doesn't work out, if Hannah decides she can't forgive you, then I'll have hurt another person I love. Daniel laughed bitterly. Add it to the list. That's not what I meant. I know. But Marcus, I'm out of options. I lied to find authenticity and ended up destroying the most authentic thing I'd found. Now all I can do is be as honest as possible and hope it's enough. And if it's not, then I learned to live with the consequences. After they hung up, Daniel finally called Sarah. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight with worry. Daniel Reed, where the hell have you been? I've called you 15 times. Ethan has been asking about you constantly. We were supposed to video call 2 days ago, and you just disappeared. I know. I'm sorry. Something came up. Something came up? Sarah's voice climbed an octave. You don't just disappear on your 6-year-old son because something came up. He cried himself to sleep last night thinking you forgot about him. Guilt crashed over Daniel like a physical wave. Let me talk to him. He's asleep now. It's almost midnight. Then tomorrow, first thing. And Sarah, he took a breath. Can you bring him to Evanston tomorrow afternoon? There's someone I want him to meet. Sarah's tone shifted, became cautious. Who? A friend. Someone important. Daniel, what's going on? You disappear for 3 months to work on a farm in Iowa. You go dark for 2 days, and now you want me to drive your son an hour north to meet some mysterious friend? What aren't you telling me? Everything. I'm not telling you everything. But Sarah, I need you to trust me. Can you do that? She sighed, heavy and tired. I've been trusting you with Ethan's well-being for 3 years, Daniel. But my trust is wearing thin. If this is about a woman, it's complicated. It's always complicated with you. But her voice had softened slightly. Fine, we'll be there at 2 o'clock. Text me the address. But Daniel, if this goes badly, if Ethan gets hurt because you're working through your grief or your loneliness or whatever this is, I know. It's on me. It's all on me. Morning came too quickly. Daniel had barely slept, anxiety and self-recrimination keeping him wired through the dark hours. Around 7, he heard Hannah moving around upstairs, the sound of the shower running, drawers opening and closing. He made coffee, scrambled eggs, set out breakfast like he was trying to domesticate the chaos of their situation. Hannah came downstairs dressed in the same borrowed clothes, her hair wet, her face carefully neutral. She sat at the kitchen counter, accepted coffee, but didn't touch the food. "Your son is coming today?" she asked. "At 2, with his nanny, Sarah." Daniel pushed the eggs toward her. "You should eat something. I'm not hungry." "Hannah, don't." She held up a hand. "Don't take care of me. Don't try to fix this with breakfast and concern. Just answer my questions honestly, and maybe we can figure out where we go from here." Daniel nodded, sitting across from her. "Ask me anything." "How long have you been planning to tell me the truth?" "I wasn't planning to tell you at all." The admission hurt to say out loud. "I thought I could keep being Luke Carter, keep the connection we'd built, and eventually just disappear back to my real life without you ever knowing." "That's sociopathic." "I know." "What changed? Why did you tell me?" "Because you asked directly, and because lying to you in that moment felt worse than revealing the truth, even knowing it would destroy everything." Hannah absorbed this, her fingers tight around her coffee mug. "What about Ethan? How long have you been away from him?" 3 months. Almost 3 months. 3 months. She repeated it slowly, processing. "You left your 6-year-old son for 3 months to play at being poor and lonely? When you say it like that, how else should I say it? You abandoned your child, Daniel. You chose your emotional experiment over your actual responsibility to another human being who depends on you." "I didn't abandon him. Sarah's excellent. He's safe. He's cared for. He's heartbroken." Hannah's voice was sharp now, cutting. "Your nanny told you he cried himself to sleep thinking you forgot about him. That's not safety. That's abandonment, dressed up in good child care." Daniel had no defense. She was absolutely right. He'd put his need for authenticity above Ethan's need for his father, and no amount of video calls or expensive childcare could compensate for 3 months of absence. "You're right," he said quietly. "I failed him. I failed both of you. I failed everyone involved in this mess because I was too selfish and too damaged to see past my own loneliness." "Are you really lonely, though?" Hannah leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Or are you just uncomfortable being alone with yourself? Because those are different things, Daniel. Loneliness is about missing connection. What you're describing sounds more like running from your own reflection." The observation cut deep because it was surgical in its accuracy. Daniel had convinced himself he was lonely, that he needed someone to see him truly. But maybe Hannah was right. Maybe what he'd actually been running from was the person he'd become after Caroline died, the careful, controlled, emotionally distant version of himself who'd built walls so high even his own son couldn't fully reach him anymore. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I've been lying to myself even more than I lied to you." They sat in heavy silence, breakfast cooling untouched between them. Finally, Hannah spoke again, her voice softer but no less serious. "When Ethan gets here, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Don't lie to him. Whatever you tell him about me, about this situation, don't lie. He deserves honesty, even if it's complicated." "I won't lie to him. And after today, after I meet him, I need time away from you, real time, real distance. I need to figure out who I am without my family's expectations and without your complications. I need space to breathe and think and decide what I actually want." Daniel's chest constricted. Okay. How much time? I don't know. Weeks, maybe months, maybe forever. She met his eyes. You need to accept that I might never forgive you, Daniel. You need to make peace with the possibility that we're done, that the best I can offer is civil distance while you help me get stable, and then we never see each other again. I can accept that. The words felt like glass in his throat. Whatever you need. Can you, though? Can you really accept being nothing to me after everything you've felt and said? Or are you going to keep inserting yourself into my life, finding excuses to check in, using your resources as an excuse for continued connection? The question forced Daniel to examine his own motivations with uncomfortable clarity. Would he be able to let Hannah go if that's what she needed? Or would he find ways to remain present, telling himself it was about helping when really it was about his own inability to accept rejection? I'll respect your boundaries, he said finally. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it, even if it kills me. It won't kill you. That's the difference between us, Daniel. You'll survive this and go back to your life, your company, your son, your wealth, all the insulation that money provides. I have to rebuild from nothing with the knowledge that the one person who seemed to genuinely care about me was actually performing a character study. It wasn't, yes, it was. Hannah's voice was final. Maybe not intentionally. Maybe you did develop real feelings, but the foundation was performance, and that contaminates everything built on top of it. She was right, and Daniel had no counter-argument. They spent the rest of the morning in separate rooms, Daniel making work calls to maintain his company in absentia. Hannah sitting in the backyard garden staring at nothing. Marcus checked in twice, offering support and asking if Daniel needed anything. Jonathan Whitmore, his lawyer, called to discuss the legal implications of Hannah's situation and assure Daniel that the Miller family's threats were hollow. Everything was being handled, managed, controlled, exactly the way Daniel's life had always operated, except for the part where the woman he loved couldn't stand to be in the same room with him. At 1:30, Daniel heard a car pull into the driveway. His heart rate spiked immediately. Sarah was early, which meant Ethan was here, which meant Daniel was about to introduce his traumatized son to the woman he'd lied to for months, and somehow this was supposed to prove his authenticity. He stepped outside just as Ethan burst from Sarah's sedan, all boundless 6-year-old energy and gap-toothed excitement. "Daddy!" Ethan launched himself at Daniel, who caught him and held on tight, breathing in the familiar scent of his son's shampoo and feeling the solid reality of his child's body against his chest. This was real. This mattered. This was the person he should have prioritized all along. "Hey, buddy, I missed you so much." "I missed you more." Ethan pulled back, his small hands on Daniel's face. "Where were you? Why did you go away so long?" "I was figuring some things out, but I'm back now." "Forever back?" "Forever back." Daniel kissed his son's forehead. "I promise." Sarah approached, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes assessing. She was in her mid-40s, had been with them since Caroline died, and knew Daniel well enough to recognize when he was drowning, even if he wouldn't admit it. "Daniel," she said carefully, "are you okay?" "Honestly? No, but I will be." He set Ethan down, keeping hold of his hand. "There's someone inside I want you both to meet." They entered the townhouse, Ethan chattering about school and his friends and a new dinosaur book Sarah had bought him. The normalcy of his son's presence helped Daniel breathe easier, helped ground him in what actually mattered. Hannah stood near the kitchen, having obviously heard them arrive. She'd changed into different borrowed clothes, jeans that actually fit, a soft blue sweater, and her hair was pulled back in the ponytail she always wore. But her face was pale, her posture tense, and Daniel saw her processing the reality of Ethan, the living proof that Daniel was actually a father, that at least that part hadn't been a lie. Ethan noticed her immediately with the straightforward curiosity of childhood. "Who are you?" "I'm Hannah." She crouched down to his level, bringing herself to eye height. "I'm a friend of your dad's." "Are you his girlfriend?" Ethan asked with zero filter. Hannah's eyes flicked to Daniel, something complicated passing across her face. "No, just a friend." "Oh, okay." Ethan accepted this easily. his attention already wandering to the townhouse's features. "Daddy, can I watch TV?" "Sure, buddy. Remote's in the living room." Ethan bounded off, his energy filling the space immediately. Sarah lingered, studying Hannah with the protective wariness of someone who'd helped raise a motherless child and wouldn't tolerate anyone hurting him further. "Sarah, this is Hannah Miller." "Hannah, this is Sarah Chen, Ethan's nanny, and the person who's kept my son alive and happy while I've been a disaster of a father." Sarah extended her hand, shaking Hannah's briefly. "Nice to meet you. Daniel, can I talk to you in the kitchen?" Daniel followed her, leaving Hannah standing awkwardly in the entryway. Once they were out of earshot, Sarah turned on him with quiet intensity. "Who is she really? And don't give me the just a friend line. I know you, Daniel." "It's complicated. Everything's complicated with you lately. Is she why you disappeared? Why you've been unreachable?" "Yes and no. Sarah, I made some terrible decisions. I lied to people, including her. I hurt her badly. And now I'm trying to make it right, but I don't know if I can." Sarah studied him carefully. "Do you love her?" "Yes." "Does Ethan need to know about her?" "I don't know yet. Maybe not. Maybe this is goodbye." "Then why bring him here? Why introduce them if there's no future?" "Because she asked to meet him. Because she needed to see that part of me was real." Sarah sighed, the sound heavy with years of watching Daniel struggle through grief and single fatherhood. "You're playing with fire, Daniel. That little boy in there has already lost his mother. If he gets attached to Hannah and then she disappears..." I know, but Sarah, I had to. She deserved to see Ethan, to understand that I wasn't completely lying about everything." "But you were mostly lying. That's the problem." Sarah's voice gentled slightly. "I care about you, Daniel. You've been dealt a terrible hand with Caroline's death, and you're doing your best. But your best hasn't been good enough lately, and Ethan's paying the price. So whatever's happening with this woman, whatever feelings you have, they can't come before your son. Not again." "They won't, I swear." They returned to the living room where Ethan had found a cartoon and was absorbed in colorful animation. Hannah sat on the far end of the couch, maintaining careful distance but watching Ethan with something soft and sad in her expression. Daniel sat between them, this strange configuration of his fractured life. His son, who deserved better, his nanny, who knew too much, and the woman he loved, who couldn't trust him. For an hour, they maintained careful normalcy. Ethan showed Hannah his favorite dinosaur facts. Sarah made small talk about the townhouse and the weather. Daniel tried to keep breathing through the surreal domesticity of it all. Then Ethan, with the innocence of children, asked the question that shattered their careful pretense. "Hannah, do you have a family?" She tensed slightly. "I do. They live in Iowa." "Do you miss them?" Hannah glanced at Daniel, something complicated passing between them. "It's complicated." My mommy's in heaven," Ethan said matter-of-factly. "I miss her, but Daddy says she's watching me and she's proud of me. Is your family in heaven too?" "Nobody. Her family's alive," Daniel said quickly. "Then why doesn't she visit them?" Ethan's confusion was genuine, his 6-year-old logic unable to comprehend family estrangement. "Sometimes," Hannah said carefully, "families don't treat each other the way they should. And when that happens, sometimes the kindest thing you can do is give each other space." "But families are supposed to love each other." Ethan was adamant about this, his worldview built on the foundation of Daniel's devotion. "They're supposed to," Hannah agreed, "but sometimes they forget how." Ethan processed this with the seriousness he gave to all important revelations. Then, with the straightforward kindness that children possess before the world teaches them otherwise, he moved closer to Hannah and took her hand. "I'm sorry your family forgot, Emily, but you can visit us. Right, Daddy? Hannah can visit us and be part of our family instead." The room went silent. Daniel felt his throat close, Sarah's sharp intake of breath audible. Hannah's eyes filled with tears, and she looked at Daniel with something that might have been longing or might have been grief or might have been both. "That's very kind of you, Ethan," she said softly. "But I don't think that's possible right now." "Why not?" "Because sometimes adults need time apart to figure things out." "That's what Daddy said about his trip. But he's back now, so the figuring out is done, right? Daniel wanted to explain that some things couldn't be figured out, that some damage couldn't be undone, that his thoughtless actions had consequences that would ripple far beyond this afternoon. But he couldn't say any of that to his 6-year-old son, who still believed in the simple mathematics of love and forgiveness. Sometimes figuring out takes longer than we expect, he said instead, his voice rough. Ethan seemed to accept this, returning his attention to cartoons. But his small hand remained in Hannah's, and Daniel watched her stare at their joined fingers like they were something precious and impossible. An hour later, Sarah announced it was time to leave. Ethan protested, wanting more time with the new person in his life, but Sarah was firm. As they prepared to go, Ethan hugged Hannah goodbye with the unselfconscious affection of childhood. "I hope you figure things out fast," he told her seriously, "so you can visit us again." "Me too," she whispered. After they left, the townhouse felt cavernous in their absence. Hannah stood by the window, watching the car disappear down the street, her arms wrapped around herself in that protective gesture Daniel had come to recognize. "He's wonderful," she said finally. "You didn't lie about that. He's smart and kind and exactly what you described." "He is." "You should be with him, Daniel, not here with me. You should go home, be his father properly, stop abandoning him for complications." "I'm not abandoning him again." "Then what are you doing?" She turned to face him. "What are we doing? You can't fix what you broke. You can't earn my trust back by introducing me to your son and proving that one thing was real. You're still the man who lied to me for months, and I'm still the woman whose life you turned upside down for an experiment in authenticity." "I know. So what happens now?" Daniel took a breath, forcing himself to be as honest as he'd ever been. "Now I help you build a life that's yours. I set you up with resources, money, lawyers, housing, whatever you need, with no strings attached. I make sure you're safe and stable. And then I walk away if that's what you want, even though it will destroy me, because it's the right thing to do. Because you deserve autonomy and choice and freedom from men who think they know what's best for you." Hannah stared at him for a long moment. "You really mean that?" "I do." "Why?" "Because I love you. And love means wanting what's best for the other person, even when it costs you everything." Tears slipped down her cheeks again. "That's the first thing you've said that sounds completely true." They stood there in Marcus's townhouse, separated by 10 feet of expensive hardwood flooring and an unbridgeable chasm of broken trust, and Daniel felt something shift in the air between them. Not forgiveness. It was too soon for that. Maybe too soon forever. But acknowledgement. Recognition that beneath all the lies and manipulation, something genuine had tried to grow. Hannah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, composing herself with visible effort. "I need you to understand something, Daniel. Even if I believe that you love me, even if I accept that your feelings are real, that doesn't erase what you did. Love doesn't justify deception. It doesn't make the manipulation okay." "I know." "Do you?" "Because I think part of you still believes that if you just explain yourself well enough, if you just demonstrate how much you care, I'll forgive you and we'll have some romantic reconciliation. But that's not how this works. That's not how trust works." Daniel forced himself to meet her eyes, to hold her gaze even though it hurt. "You're right. I've been thinking about this wrong. I've been so focused on making you understand why I lied that I haven't fully accepted the damage those lies caused. I violated your trust, used your vulnerability, and treated your life like background scenery for my emotional journey, and no amount of genuine feeling changes those facts." Hannah's expression softened slightly, surprise flickering across her features. "That's the second completely true thing you've said. I'm trying to learn. It's too late for learning to matter between us." She said it gently, not cruelly, but the words still landed like physical blows. "Whatever could have been, that died when you revealed Luke Carter was fiction. You can't resurrect it by being honest now. The foundation was rotten, so the whole structure collapsed." Daniel felt something crack open in his chest, grief pouring through the fissure. She was right. He'd known it intellectually, but hearing her say it out loud made it devastatingly real. They were done. Not because she was being unreasonable or holding grudges, but because he'd destroyed something irreplaceable before he'd fully understood its value. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay. Then Let's talk about what happens next. For you, not for us. Hannah moved to the couch, sitting carefully like she was still afraid of leaving marks on expensive furniture. Daniel took the chair across from her, maintaining the distance she needed. I've been thinking about this all night, she said, about what I actually want, separate from my family's expectations or your complications or anything else. And I keep coming back to the same thing. I want to be the person who makes decisions about my own life, not my father deciding I should manage the farm accounts, not my mother deciding I should marry whoever solves their debt problems, not you deciding I should be rescued and set up somewhere safe. I want autonomy, Daniel, real autonomy, not just a different form of dependence. That's fair. What does autonomy look like for you? Hannah was quiet for a moment, thinking. I want to go to school. I never finished college because the money was always needed elsewhere. I want to study business administration. Learn how to actually run things properly instead of just keeping broken systems barely functional. I want to work, earn my own money, pay my own bills. I want to live somewhere that's mine, not borrowed from your friend or subsidized by your guilt. She paused. And I want to see the ocean. That's probably stupid compared to the practical things, but I want to stand at the edge of something bigger than Iowa and feel what it's like to be small in a good way, not a diminishing way. Daniel's throat tightened. Everything she wanted was so reasonable, so achievable, and yet her family's circumstances and his interference had made it seem impossible. None of that's stupid. It's all completely valid. But it requires money I don't have, which brings me back to depending on you, which defeats the whole purpose of autonomy. What if we frame it differently? Daniel leaned forward slightly. Not as charity or dependence, but as restitution. I used your situation for my own purposes. I took up space in your life under false pretenses. I owe you compensation for that exploitation, separate from any feelings involved. So let me pay for school, for housing, for basic stability. Not as gifts with strings attached, but as payment of a debt I genuinely owe. Hannah studied him carefully. That's a convenient rationalization. It's also true. I do owe you. And accepting help doesn't make you weak or dependent. It makes you practical. You can't build autonomy from nothing. You need a foundation, and I can provide that foundation without it meaning anything beyond restitution. And what about when I'm settled, when I finished school and started working and built a life? What happens to you then? Do you just disappear, stay on the periphery hoping I'll change my mind? Insert yourself into my life as a friend who's really waiting for more? The question forced Daniel to confront his own intentions with brutal honesty. What would he do? Could he really let Hannah go completely, or would he find excuses to maintain connection, telling himself it was innocent when really it was manipulation's quieter cousin? I don't know, he admitted. I want to tell you I'll disappear completely, that I'll respect your boundaries perfectly. But I don't know if I'm capable of that. I've spent 3 years being lonely and disconnected, and you were the first person who made me feel human again. The thought of never seeing you, never knowing if you're okay, never having any connection. He stopped, swallowed hard. It terrifies me. But that terror is my problem, not yours. So here's what I can promise. I will never show up uninvited. I will never use my resources to check up on you or insert myself into your life. If you want updates, if you want connection, you'll have to initiate it. I'll respond, but I won't pursue. Does that work? Hannah considered this, her expression unreadable. What about Ethan? He clearly liked me. If you disappear from my life, he's going to ask about me. I'll tell him the truth, that you needed time and space to figure things out, and we're respecting that. He'll understand. Kids are resilient. Kids also form attachments quickly. You shouldn't have introduced us if there was a chance I'd disappear from his life too. You're right. That was selfish. I wanted you to see that part of me was real, and I didn't think about how it might affect him. Daniel ran his hands through his hair, exhausted by his own capacity for causing unintended harm. I keep making the same mistake, prioritizing what I need or want without fully considering the impact on everyone else. At least you're recognizing the pattern. Hannah's voice held a hint of something that wasn't quite forgiveness, but wasn't pure condemnation either. That's progress, even if it's too late for us. They spent the rest of the afternoon making practical plans. Daniel called Jonathan Whitmore, his lawyer, and arranged for him to meet with Hannah to discuss her legal options regarding her family and Ashford. Jonathan, professional and discreet, asked only the questions necessary to provide effective representation. They discussed emancipation from family obligations, restraining orders if needed, and the legal framework that would protect Hannah's autonomy going forward. Next, Daniel researched college programs in business administration, finding several excellent schools within a few hours of Chicago. Hannah could start in the spring semester if she moved quickly on applications, and Daniel committed to covering all costs: tuition, housing, books, living expenses, as part of his restitution payment. They'd set it up through a trust that provided regular disbursements, giving Hannah financial stability without requiring ongoing interaction with Daniel. "This is too much," Hannah said when they'd finished outlining the plan. "School and housing and everything. It's hundreds of thousands of dollars." "It's a fraction of what I spend on things that don't matter," Daniel said simply. "And it's less than what I owe you for the ways I used your situation. I don't know how to accept this." "You don't have to know how. You just have to say yes and let yourself have the future you deserve." Hannah stared at the laptop screen showing university websites, her expression a complicated mixture of hope and grief. "If I do this, if I accept your help and go to school and build this new life, we really are done, aren't we? There's no going back, no trying again later, no maybe when things are different. This is goodbye." Daniel felt the finality of it settle over him like snow, cold and suffocating. "Yes, this is goodbye." "And you're okay with that?" "No, I'm devastated, but I'm accepting it because it's what's right." She nodded slowly, tears tracking down her cheeks again. "Then I need one more thing from you before we go our separate ways." "Anything." "I need you to tell me the complete truth about why you came to Iowa. Not the sanitized version about loneliness and authenticity, the real reason. What were you actually running from?" Daniel had known this question would come eventually. He'd prepared various answers, different versions of the truth edited for palatability, but Hannah deserved better than his careful narratives. She deserved the raw, unfiltered reality of his emotional wreckage. "I was running from grief," he said quietly. "Not the grief of losing Caroline. I'd made peace with that mostly. But the grief of realizing I'd lost myself in the process of surviving her death. I used to be someone who felt things deeply, who connected with people, who wasn't afraid of vulnerability. And then Caroline died, and I built these walls to protect Ethan and myself from more pain. I became controlled, distant, careful. I could take care of my son's physical needs perfectly, but I couldn't access the emotional openness he needed from me. I could run my company flawlessly, but I couldn't maintain a genuine friendship. I could date women, but I couldn't risk actually caring about them because caring meant potential loss, and I couldn't survive another loss." He paused, feeling the truth of it settle in his bones. "So I came to Iowa to see if the old Daniel still existed somewhere underneath all the protective layers. I thought if I stripped away the money and the status and the tragic backstory, all the things that complicated relationships in my real life, I could find out if I was still capable of genuine connection. If someone could see me and want me without all the external trappings." He met Hannah's eyes. "And you did. You saw Luke Carter, who was really just the parts of Daniel Reed I'd buried under grief and self-protection, and you cared about him. You brought him dinner and asked about his son and treated him like he mattered. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt human again. I felt like something other than a father-shaped robot going through the motions of survival." "But Luke Carter wasn't real," Hannah said softly. "The person I cared about was fictional." "Oh, Luke Carter was more real than Daniel Reed had been in years. He was the version of me that still knew how to feel, how to connect, how to be vulnerable. The circumstances were fake, but the emotional availability was genuine. I'd just forgotten how to access that without pretending to be someone else." Hannah absorbed this, understanding dawning in her expression. "So you didn't come to Iowa to find someone else. You came to find yourself." "Yes, and I found both, myself and you, and I fucked it up so completely that I lost you while I was still figuring out how to be me again." "That's the saddest thing you've said," Hannah's voice broke slightly. "Because it means you were using me as a mirror, Daniel. You needed me to reflect back the version of yourself you'd lost. That's not love. That's narcissism dressed in romantic language." The accusation hit like a physical blow because it contained uncomfortable truth. Had he loved Hannah, or had he loved the way she made him feel about himself? Had he cared about her as a person, or had he cared about what her kindness said about his essential worthiness? I don't think it was just that, he said slowly, carefully. I think it started that way, maybe. But Hannah, the moment in the barn when you asked if I'd ever thought about leaving, that wasn't about me. That was about seeing you trapped and wanting you free, regardless of how it affected my emotional journey. And last night, when I pulled you away from your family in Ashford, I wasn't thinking about myself at all. I was thinking about you being treated like property and rage, and the absolute certainty that I couldn't let that happen even if it meant destroying my carefully constructed experiment. So you're saying you moved from narcissism to white knight syndrome? That's not actually better, Daniel. I'm saying I started from a selfish place and developed genuine feelings that transcended that selfishness. Yes, I needed you initially as a mirror, but I ended up loving you as a person, flawed, imperfect, trying his best loving you. Hannah shook her head slowly. I want to believe that. Part of me does believe it, but it doesn't change the fundamental problem. You built our entire relationship on lies, and I can't trust that any feeling derived from lies is reliable. Maybe you did develop genuine love. Maybe it was all manipulation. I'll never know for certain, and that uncertainty is its own kind of prison. She was right, and Daniel had no counterargument. He'd created an impossible situation where even his most authentic emotions were suspect, contaminated by their fraudulent origins. They sat in painful silence as the afternoon faded into evening. Finally, Hannah spoke again, her voice tired but determined. I'm going to accept your help. The school funding, the housing assistance, the legal support, all of it. Not because I've forgiven you or because I think we might reconcile someday, but because I'm practical and I recognize that this is my best chance at building the life I want. But Daniel, I need you to understand that accepting your help is where we end. Once things are set up, once I'm established somewhere and school starts, we're done. No friendly check-ins, no occasional coffee meetings to see how I'm doing, no gradual rebuilding of connection. We're done completely, permanently, finally. I understand. Daniel forced the words out through a throat that felt crushed. And I accept your terms. Good. Hannah stood, smoothing her borrowed clothes nervously. Then let's spend tomorrow handling logistics. I'll meet with your lawyer, we'll look at housing options near whatever school makes the most sense, and we'll set up the financial arrangements. And then I'd like you to take me somewhere. Where? The ocean. You promised I'd stand at the edge and feel small in a good way. I want that before we say goodbye. I want one memory that isn't complicated by lies or hurt or impossible feelings. Just you and me and something bigger than both of us. Daniel's chest constricted. The request was generous and devastating simultaneously, a gift of closure that would also be a final ending. Okay, we'll go to the ocean. Thank you. She went upstairs, leaving Daniel alone with the wreckage of his good intentions. He called Marcus, needing to hear his friend's voice, needing an anchor to reality. How'd it go? Marcus asked. She's accepting the help but ending things completely. We're done. I'm sorry, man. I know that's not what you wanted. It's what I deserve, Daniel laughed bitterly. I spent 3 months pretending to be poor so I could find authentic connection, and I found it. And I destroyed it through the very inauthenticity I was trying to escape. There's probably a lesson in there about hubris or karma or something. The lesson is that you can't build truth on lies, no matter how good your intentions. Marcus's voice was gentle, but firm. You meant well, Daniel. I believe that. But you went about it in the worst possible way, and now you're paying the price. What do I do now? You honor her wishes. You set her up like you promised. You take her to see the ocean, and then you let her go completely. No checking up on her, no finding excuses to stay connected. You let her build her life without you in it. And then what? I just go back to Chicago and pretend this never happened? No, you go back to Chicago and you learn from this. You figure out how to be emotionally available without pretending to be someone else. You work on being present for Ethan in the ways he actually needs. You build genuine relationships based on honesty instead of performance. You become the person Luke Carter pretended to be, except for real this time. Daniel knew Marcus was right, but the path forward felt impossible to navigate. How did he maintain the emotional openness he'd rediscovered as Luke Carter while living as Daniel Reed? How did he stay vulnerable and genuine when his real life was filled with people who wanted things from him? I don't know if I can do that, he admitted. You have to, because the alternative is spending the rest of your life being half present, half alive, half connected to everything and everyone around you. And Ethan deserves better than that. You deserve better than that. After they hung up, Daniel sat in the darkening townhouse and thought about his son, Ethan, who'd hugged Hannah with unself-conscious affection. Ethan, who'd cried himself to sleep thinking his father had forgotten him. Ethan, who deserved a dad who was fully present, fully engaged, fully capable of emotional availability without requiring poverty. Cosplay to access those feelings. He pulled out his phone and called Sarah. Is he still awake? Just barely. Want to say goodnight? Please. Sarah handed the phone to Ethan, and Daniel heard his son's sleepy voice. Hi, Daddy. Hey, buddy. I just wanted to tell you I love you. Love you too. Is Hannah coming to visit us again? Daniel's throat tightened. Probably not, bud. She has things she needs to do, places she needs to go. But you'll see me more, okay? A lot more. No more long trips away, just you and me. Promise? I promise. And Ethan, I'm sorry I was gone so long. That wasn't fair to you. It's okay, Daddy. You were figuring things out. Ethan yawned hugely. Did you figure them out? Yeah, buddy. I figured them out. Good. Now you can stay home. Now I can stay home. After saying goodnight and hanging up, Daniel realized he was crying, silent tears tracking down his face in the darkness. He was crying for Hannah, for the relationship they'd never have. He was crying for Ethan, for the 3 months of absence his son had endured with characteristic resilience. He was crying for Caroline, whose death had set all of this in motion. And he was crying for himself, for the lonely, grief-stricken man who'd thought he could find authenticity through deception and had learned too late that some lessons only come through loss. The next day passed in a blur of logistics. Jonathan Whitmore arrived at 9, impeccably dressed and carrying a briefcase full of legal documents. He spent 2 hours with Hannah, explaining her options regarding her family and discussing the restraining order possibilities if Ashford continued to pursue her. Hannah listened with the focused attention she'd given to farm accounting, asking smart questions, taking notes, absorbing information like she was studying for an exam. Daniel stayed mostly out of the way, making coffee and answering questions when asked, but otherwise giving Hannah space to handle her own affairs. Watching her engage with the lawyer, confident, articulate, clearly intelligent despite her lack of formal education, made Daniel's chest ache with what might have been. She would have been extraordinary in his world, navigating boardrooms and negotiations with the same careful competence she'd applied to keeping her family's farm barely functional. By afternoon, they'd settled on Northwestern University for Hannah's business program, with classes starting in January. Marcus had a friend in the housing office who could expedite the application process, and they'd found a small apartment in Evanston, not far from campus, that would give Hannah privacy and proximity to school. The financial arrangements were set up through a trust that would provide monthly disbursements for the next 4 years, covering all educational and living expenses with enough cushion for emergencies. This is real, Hannah said, staring at the apartment photos on her laptop. This is actually happening. I'm going to college. I'm going to have my own place. I'm going to be autonomous. You are, Daniel confirmed. And you're going to be extraordinary. She looked at him then, really looked, and something in her expression softened. Thank you for all of this. Even though you screwed up terribly, even though I can't forgive you, thank you for using your resources to give me a chance at the life I deserve. You're welcome. Though really, thank you for being gracious enough to accept help from someone who hurt you so badly. They spent the evening packing the few belongings Hannah had, mostly borrowed clothes from Marcus's guest room collection, and preparing for the next day's trip to the ocean. Daniel had decided on the Outer Banks in North Carolina, a 7-hour drive but worth it for the raw, powerful coastline that would give Hannah the experience she'd dreamed about. They left before dawn, driving through the purple-gray light of early morning, the highway mostly empty except for long-haul trucks. Hannah dozed in the passenger seat, exhausted by the emotional intensity of the past few days. Daniel drove in silence, letting himself memorize the sound of her breathing, the way her hair fell across her face, the the simple fact of her presence beside him. This was the last time. After today, she'd begin her new life, and he'd return to Chicago, and whatever connection they'd built, authentic or performative, genuine or contaminated, would be permanently severed. The sun was high when they finally reached the coast, the Atlantic Ocean spreading before them in endless blue-gray waves. Daniel parked near the beach access, and they walked toward the water in silence, feet sinking into sand that was cool despite the afternoon warmth. Hannah stopped at the edge where waves met shore, where the solid world dissolved into constant motion. She stood very still, her arms at her sides, her face tilted toward the wind, her eyes taking in the vast expanse of water and sky and possibility. Daniel stayed back, giving her space, watching her experience something she'd dreamed about for years. The wind whipped her hair around her face. Seabirds wheeled overhead, their cries sharp and lonely. The waves rolled in with rhythmic inevitability, each one unique, each one part of an eternal pattern. After a long moment, Hannah turned to him, and her face was wet with tears. Though whether from emotion or wind, Daniel couldn't tell. "It's perfect," she said. "It's exactly what I imagined, except more. So much more." "I'm glad." She walked back to him, stopping just close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her eyes, the freckles across her nose that he'd never noticed during their time on the farm. "I'm going to forgive you eventually, Daniel. Maybe not today, or this year, or even in 5 years. But eventually, when I'm stable and happy, and I've built something that's genuinely mine, I'm going to look back on this and forgive you, not because you deserve it, or because what you did was okay, but because holding on to hurt forever is its own kind of prison, and I don't want to live in prison anymore." Daniel felt something break and heal simultaneously in his chest. "Thank you." "But Daniel, forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. Forgiveness doesn't mean we'll try again someday. Forgiveness just means I'll stop letting your lies define my story." "I understand." They stood there at the edge of the continent, two people who'd found each other under false pretenses, and discovered something genuine before circumstances and consequences tore them apart. The ocean rolled on, indifferent to human drama, vast enough to make their problems feel small in exactly the way Hannah had wanted. "I should go," she said finally. "Back to the car, back to the townhouse, back to preparing for my new life. If I stay here much longer, I might convince myself that closures can be enough. And I know they can't be." Daniel nodded, not trusting his voice. They walked back to the car in silence, neither of them looking back at the ocean, both of them carrying the image forward into whatever came next. The drive home was quieter than the drive there, weighted with the knowledge that their time together was measured in hours now, not days. Hannah fell asleep again somewhere in Virginia, her head tilted against the window, her breathing soft and even. Daniel let himself glance at her occasionally, memorizing details, the curve of her cheek, the set of her shoulders, the simple reality of her existence. They reached Evanston around midnight. Marcus had left a message saying Hannah's apartment was ready, fully furnished through the university's emergency housing program, keys waiting with the building manager. Tomorrow, she'd move in. Tomorrow, her new life would begin. Tomorrow, Daniel Reed would drive back to Chicago without her and figure out how to be a complete person again. But tonight, they still had a few more hours. Inside the townhouse, Hannah went straight upstairs without saying goodnight. Daniel heard the shower running, heard her moving around the guest room, heard the small sounds of someone preparing for sleep. He stayed downstairs on the couch, too wired to rest, too aware that morning would bring endings. Around 2 a.m., he heard footsteps on the stairs. Hannah appeared in borrowed pajamas, her hair damp, her face scrubbed clean. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "No." "Me neither." She sat in the armchair across from him, maintaining their careful distance. "I keep thinking about tomorrow, about starting over completely, and I'm excited, but I'm also terrified." "That's normal. New beginnings are scary." "Will you tell me something true?" she asked suddenly. "Something completely honest, with no editing or self-protection or trying to make yourself look better?" "Of course. If you could go back to the beginning, knowing everything that would happen, would you still come to Iowa? Would you still create Luke Carter and lie to me and all of it, knowing we'd end up here?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. He thought about the question carefully, examining his motivations and consequences with painful honesty. Yes, he said finally. I would. Not because I'm glad we're ending or because I think the line was justified, but because knowing you, even briefly, even destructively, it woke something in me that had been dead for years. You reminded me how to feel deeply, how to connect genuinely, how to care about someone beyond their utility to me. And yes, I learned all of that through hurting you, which is terrible and wrong. But I did learn it, and that learning makes me a better father, a better friend, a better person. So selfishly, cruelly, wrongly, yes, I'd do it again. Hannah absorbed this, her expression unreadable. That's the most honest thing you've said, and the most painful to hear. I know, I'm sorry. Don't apologize for telling the truth. That's the only thing I've ever wanted from you. They sat together in the dark townhouse, their last night together unfolding in silence and stolen glances and the particular awareness of impending loss. Around 4 a.m., Hannah finally stood. I'm going to try to sleep. Tomorrow's going to be difficult, and I need to be rested. Okay. She started toward the stairs, then paused. Daniel? Yes? Despite everything, despite all the hurt and lies and impossibility, thank you for saving me. Not from Ashford necessarily, though that too, but for saving me from a life where I'd forgotten I could want things for myself, where I'd accepted being invisible and useful as my entire identity. You woke me up too, in your flawed, destructive way, and I'll always be grateful for that, even if I can't forgive the methods. Then she was gone, climbing the stairs to sleep in her last night as someone Daniel had any right to see or speak to or think about beyond distant well wishes. Daniel remained on the couch until dawn painted the windows gray, thinking about endings and consequences and the terrible price of learning wisdom too late to salvage what you've destroyed. Morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that felt like mockery. Daniel had finally dozed off around 5, jerking awake 2 hours later with the immediate, visceral understanding that today was the end. He heard Hannah moving around upstairs, the sounds of someone preparing to step into a completely new life. He made coffee, set out breakfast neither of them would eat, and waited. She came downstairs dressed in new clothes they'd bought yesterday, jeans that actually fit, a soft gray sweater, practical boots. She looked different somehow, more solid, more present, less like someone who'd learned to make herself invisible, and more like someone preparing to take up space in the world. Morning, she said quietly. Morning, coffee's ready? They moved through the rituals of breakfast in careful silence, both of them aware that every mundane action was weighted with finality. This was the last time Daniel would pour her coffee, the last time they'd sit across from each other in shared morning quiet, the last time their lives would overlap in any meaningful way. Around 9, Marcus arrived with paperwork, the final trust documents that would ensure Hannah's financial stability, the apartment keys, a packet of information about Northwestern's resources for non-traditional students. He was professional and kind, giving Hannah space while making sure everything was properly documented. You've got my number if anything goes wrong with the arrangements, he told her. Don't hesitate to call. Thank you, Hannah said, for your help, for letting me stay here, for not judging the mess Daniel created. We all create messes, Marcus said gently. The measure of a person is what they do after, not whether they screw up in the first place. He glanced at Daniel. Some of us are still figuring out the after part. After Marcus left, Daniel and Hannah loaded her few belongings into his car. The small duffel of borrowed clothes, the laptop Marcus had provided for school, the folder of legal documents that proved she existed independently of her family for the first time in her life. It took less than 10 minutes to pack up everything Hannah owned in the world, a stark reminder of how thoroughly she'd been stripped of autonomy before Daniel's disastrous intervention. The drive to her new apartment was short, less than 15 minutes through Evanston's tree-lined streets. The building was modest but well-maintained, the kind of place graduate students and young professionals chose for its proximity to campus and reasonable rent. Hannah's unit was on the 3rd floor, a studio with large windows overlooking a small courtyard. It came furnished with basics, bed, desk, small kitchen table, but was otherwise empty, waiting for her to fill it with the textures and details of her actual life. She stood in the center of the space, turning slowly to take it all in. It's perfect. It's exactly what I need. Good. Daniel set her duffel on the bed, suddenly unsure what to do with his hands. The lease is paid through graduation. Utilities are covered. You've got the trust information for monthly expenses. Jonathan's number if you need legal help. And Marcus said the housing office contact can help with any building issues. You've thought of everything. I tried to. Daniel forced himself to meet her eyes. Hannah, I know we've said everything that needs saying, but I want to make sure one more time. Are you okay? Really okay? Do you have everything you need to make this work? She smiled, and it was the saddest, most genuine expression he'd seen on her face. I have everything I need materially. Emotionally, I'm a mess, but that's not your responsibility to fix, Daniel. That's mine to work through. I know, He stopped, swallowed hard. I want you to be happy. That's all I've ever really wanted. That's not true, she said gently. You wanted me to make you feel less lonely. You wanted me to validate that you were still worthy of being loved. You wanted me to serve purposes I didn't know I was serving. But somewhere in all of that, you also started wanting me to be happy, and I believe that part is genuine. So thank you for that. Daniel felt tears threatening and fought them back. You're going to do extraordinary things, Hannah Miller. You're going to finish school and build a career and stand at oceans all over the world. You're going to be so happy you'll forget what it felt like to be invisible. I'll never forget that, she said quietly, but maybe I'll learn to forgive it, both in my family and in myself for accepting it for so long. They stood there in her empty apartment, two people who'd found each other in the worst possible way and discovered something real before circumstances made that reality impossible to sustain. Daniel knew he should leave, should give her space to begin her new life without his presence contaminating it. But he couldn't make himself move toward the door. Hannah seemed to understand. She crossed the small distance between them and pulled him into a hug. Brief, fierce, final. Daniel held on carefully, conscious of not taking more than she was offering, trying to memorize the feeling of her in his arms one last time. Goodbye, Daniel, she whispered against his shoulder. Goodbye, Hannah. She pulled back first, stepping away and wrapping her arms around herself in that protective gesture he knew so well. I need you to leave now. If you stay, I might ask you to stay longer, and I can't do that to either of us. Daniel nodded, not trusting his voice. He walked to the door, his hand on the knob, and turned back one more time. If you ever need anything, I know, but I won't ask. This has to be a clean break, Daniel, for both of us. I know. He left, pulling the door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like the end of everything. He made it to his car before the tears came, sitting in the driver's seat and crying with the kind of wrenching sobs that felt like they were being torn from his chest. He cried for Hannah, for the hurt he'd caused and the trust he'd destroyed. He cried for the relationship they'd never have, for the future he'd imagined during late nights on the farm when he'd still believed Luke Carter could somehow transform into someone Hannah could love. He cried for his own stupidity, his selfishness, his desperate need for connection that had blinded him to the harm he was causing. Eventually, the tears subsided into exhausted numbness. Daniel wiped his face, started the car, and drove toward Chicago, toward his real life, toward his son who needed him to be fully present, fully engaged, fully the father Ethan deserved. The drive felt longer than it should have, every mile a reckoning with the person he'd been and the person he needed to become. He'd spent 3 months playing at poverty to find authenticity, only to discover that authenticity couldn't be manufactured through deception. He'd wanted to know if someone could love him without his money, but he'd rigged the experiment so thoroughly that the results were meaningless. He'd found genuine connection with Hannah, but he'd built it on such a rotten foundation that it had collapsed the moment truth touched it. He'd failed spectacularly at everything he'd set out to accomplish. But Marcus was right. The measure of a person wasn't whether they screwed up, but what they did after. And Daniel needed to figure out his after, not for Hannah's sake or to assuage his guilt, but because he had a 6-year-old son who deserved better than a father performing emotional availability while remaining fundamentally disconnected. He went straight to Sarah's house when he reached Chicago. She opened the door with Ethan on her hip, the boy's face lighting up immediately. "Daddy!" Daniel took his son, holding him close and breathing in the familiar scent of his hair. "Hey, buddy, I missed you." Stew more. Ethan pulled back to study his father's face with the serious attention children bring to important observations. You look sad. I am a little sad, but I'm also really happy to see you. Is it about Hannah? Is she not coming to visit? Sarah's expression sharpened with interest, but she stayed quiet, letting Daniel handle it. Hannah has her own life to build now, Daniel said carefully. Sometimes people come into our lives for a little while and they help us learn important things, but then they have to go do their own growing. That's what's happening with Hannah. Ethan processed this with the gravity of someone much older. Did you learn important things? I did. I learned that I need to be more honest, even when it's scary. I learned that I've been hiding parts of myself because I was afraid of getting hurt again after Mommy died. And I learned that you deserve a daddy who's all the way present, not just halfway. You're present now? I'm working on it, and I promise you, Ethan, no more long trips away. No more being gone when you need me. From now on, I'm here, completely here. Ethan hugged him tightly. Good. I like you here. Sarah made tea while Ethan played with his toys, and she and Daniel sat at her kitchen table having the conversation he'd been avoiding for months. Tell me everything, she said. No editing. So he did. He told her about Luke Carter, about Hannah's kindness, about the forced marriage he'd prevented, and the lies he'd told, and the spectacular way everything had imploded when truth finally surfaced. He told her about taking Hannah to the ocean, about setting her up with school and housing, about the goodbye that had felt like dying. Sarah listened without judgment, her expression thoughtful. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. You're an idiot, she said finally. I know. But you're an idiot who's trying to learn, which is better than an idiot who keeps making the same mistakes. She sipped her tea. What are you going to do now? Be a better father. Figure out how to be emotionally available without pretending to be someone else. Probably therapy. Lots of therapy. Stop dating until I've sorted out my own issues and can approach relationships with actual honesty instead of performance. He laughed without humor. Basically, become an actual adult at age 32. That's a good plan. Ambitious, but good. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest, even if it's hard to hear. Okay. Have I been a terrible father? Not just the Iowa thing, but before that, since Caroline died. Have I been so focused on survival and logistics that I've forgotten to actually be present with Ethan? Sarah considered this carefully. You've been a grieving father doing his best under impossible circumstances. You've provided everything Ethan needs materially. You've been consistent, reliable, protective. But Daniel... She paused, choosing words carefully. You've also been distant. Careful. Like you're afraid that if you let yourself love him too much, losing him would destroy you. So you've been perfect on the surface while holding something essential back. And kids feel that, even if they can't articulate it. The words hurt precisely because they were true. Daniel had been protecting himself from further loss by maintaining emotional distance from his own son, telling himself it was healthy boundaries when really it was just fear dressed up as responsibility. How do I fix that? You already started, by recognizing it, by committing to change, by being willing to do the work. But Daniel, you have to actually do the work. Not just promise to do it. Get therapy. Learn how to grieve properly instead of just surviving it. Figure out how to be vulnerable with your son without it feeling terrifying. Show up for him emotionally, not just physically. What if I fail? What if I try and I still can't access those feelings? Then you keep trying. You don't get to opt out of emotional presence just because it's hard. Ethan deserves better, and you know that. After leaving Sarah's house with Ethan, Daniel took his son to their penthouse. Walking through the door felt surreal after 3 months away. Everything exactly as he'd left it, preserved in expensive stasis while his life had imploded in Iowa. Ethan ran immediately to his room, excited to show his father every toy and book and drawing he'd accumulated during the separation. Daniel followed, settling on the floor of Ethan's room and letting his son talk about everything: school, friends, things Sarah had taught him, movies they'd watched. And for the first time in years, Daniel really listened. Not with half his attention while thinking about work or logistics or the next task on his endless mental list, but completely, fully, giving Ethan his entire focus. "Daddy?" Ethan said during a pause in his monologue. "Yeah, buddy? I'm really glad you're home." "Me too, Ethan. Me too." That night, after Ethan was asleep, Daniel sat in his study and made a list. Not a typical Daniel Reed list full of business objectives and measurable goals, but something more honest. He wrote down everything he needed to change, everything he needed to learn, everything he needed to become for his son and for himself. Find a therapist. Process Caroline's death properly. Learn emotional availability. Stop using work as armor. Be present with Ethan. Build genuine friendships. Date honestly or don't date at all. Stop performing and start feeling. Remember who I was before grief made me careful. Honor what Hannah taught me without using that lesson to justify the harm I caused. He stared at the list for a long time, understanding that this was the real work, not finding someone to love him, but becoming someone capable of healthy love. Not proving he was worthy, but accepting that worthiness wasn't something you proved or earned. Not escaping loneliness through deception, but learning to sit with difficult emotions until they transformed into something bearable. The next morning, he called his assistant and cleared his schedule for the following week. He contacted 3 therapists Marcus had recommended, scheduling intake appointments. He reached out to old friends he'd been neglecting, suggesting lunch or coffee or just time together. He drafted an email to Reed Agricultural Holdings Board explaining he'd be taking a more active parenting role and reducing his daily operational involvement. Then he took Ethan to school himself, walking him inside and talking to his teacher, learning about his son's daily life instead of relying on Sarah's summaries. He picked Ethan up that afternoon, took him to the park, pushed him on swings until Ethan's laughter rang out clear and joyous. He made dinner, badly, burning the chicken and overcooking the vegetables, but Ethan didn't care, delighted just to have his father attempting domesticity. "This is the best dinner ever," Ethan declared through a mouthful of charred chicken. "You're a terrible liar, but I appreciate the support." "No, really, it's good because you made it." Daniel felt something crack open in his chest, not breaking, but opening, like a door he'd kept sealed was finally unlocking. This was what mattered, this connection, this presence, this willingness to show up imperfectly and try anyway. Over the following weeks, Daniel slowly reconstructed his life around new priorities. Therapy revealed depths of grief he'd been avoiding, forcing him to actually process Caroline's death instead of just surviving it. He learned that he'd been stuck in a holding pattern, unable to fully grieve because grieving felt like letting go, and letting go felt like betrayal. His therapist helped him understand that honoring Caroline's memory didn't require freezing himself in the moment of her death, that she would have wanted him to live fully, love again, be present with their son. He started having regular dinners with Marcus, rebuilding their friendship beyond business calls and logistical support. He reconnected with Caroline's parents, who'd been giving him space but were desperate to be more involved in Ethan's life. He joined a grief support group for widowed parents and discovered he wasn't alone in his struggle to balance mourning and moving forward. And slowly, carefully, he began allowing himself to actually feel things again without the protective layers he'd built. Joy didn't feel dangerous anymore. Sadness didn't feel bottomless. Vulnerability didn't feel like weakness. He was learning to be a whole person again, not just a carefully controlled performance of one. Ethan blossomed under Daniel's increased presence. They developed new routines. Saturday morning pancakes that Daniel was slowly learning not to burn. Wednesday evening library visits, bedtime stories where Daniel did terrible voice acting, and Ethan giggled until he couldn't breathe. The careful distance Daniel had maintained began dissolving, replaced by genuine closeness that didn't feel terrifying anymore. "Daddy?" Ethan asked one night during their bedtime routine. "Are you still sad about Hannah?" Daniel had wondered when this question would come. "Sometimes, but I'm learning that being sad about something doesn't mean it wasn't right. Sometimes the right choice still hurts." "Do you think she's happy?" "I hope so. I think she's building a really good life for herself. Maybe we'll see her again someday." "Maybe. But buddy, even if we don't, she taught me important things that made me a better daddy to you, so I'm grateful for that." Ethan considered this with his characteristic seriousness. "I'm grateful too then, because I like this version of you better." "What version?" "The one that's actually here." Daniel pulled his son close, understanding that children saw truths adults spent years denying. He had been absent even when present, performing fatherhood while holding back the emotional availability that made it real. Hannah hadn't just woken him up to his capacity for connection, she'd shown him the cost of his protective distance. 3 months after saying goodbye to Hannah, Daniel received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single photograph. Hannah standing at the edge of the ocean, her arms spread wide, her face tilted toward the sky in an expression of pure joy. On the back, she'd written, "Thank you for this, for everything, despite everything. I'm learning to be happy. I hope you are too." Daniel stared at the photo for a long time, feeling the complicated tangle of emotions, grief for what they'd never have, joy for her obvious happiness, gratitude that she'd thought to share this moment with him. He put the photo in his desk drawer, not displayed but not discarded, a reminder of everything he'd learned through spectacular failure. He didn't write back. She'd been clear that they needed clean separation, and he was learning to respect boundaries even when it hurt. But he allowed himself to hope that somewhere in Evanston, Hannah was thriving in her new life, building the autonomy she'd always deserved. 6 months later, Daniel walked into Ethan's school for parent-teacher conferences and saw a flyer on the bulletin board, Northwestern University Business School Community Outreach Program. His heart seized immediately, wondering if Hannah might be involved, if this was a sign he should reach out. Then he caught himself, recognizing the old patterns, looking for excuses to insert himself into her life, manufacturing reasons for connection. He walked past the flyer without taking a number. Instead, he went to Ethan's classroom and talked to his teacher about his son's progress. Ethan was doing well, excellent in reading, struggling slightly with math, but improving, popular with classmates because of his genuine kindness. The teacher mentioned that Ethan had written a story about a woman who wanted to see the ocean, and Daniel couldn't help but smile, understanding that some lessons rippled outward in unexpected ways. That night, tucking Ethan into bed, Daniel asked about the story. "It's about Hannah," Ethan said simply. "Remember? She wanted to see the ocean and you took her there. So I wrote about how she stood at the edge and felt big feelings." "That's a good story, buddy. Do you think she still thinks about us sometimes?" Daniel considered lying, protecting his son from complicated truths. But he'd committed to honesty, even when difficult. "I don't know. Maybe sometimes. But Ethan, even if she doesn't, we can still be glad we knew her, right? We can still appreciate what she taught us without needing her to be part of our lives now." "That makes sense." Ethan yawned hugely. "Daddy, I'm really proud of you." "Why?" "Because you're trying really hard to be better. I can tell." Daniel felt tears threatening and didn't fight them. "I'm trying, buddy. Every day, I'm trying." That's all that matters. A year after Iowa, Daniel sat in his therapist's office discussing his progress. He'd done the work, processed his grief, learned emotional availability, rebuilt his relationship with Ethan, established genuine friendships, stopped performing, and started feeling. He'd become the person Luke Carter had pretended to be, except authentically this time. "How do you feel about dating again?" his therapist asked. "Terrified," Daniel admitted, "but maybe ready. Not rushing into anything, but open to the possibility." "What are you afraid of?" "Falling into old patterns, leading with my wealth or my tragic backstory instead of just being myself. Not being honest about who I am and what I'm looking for." "And who are you? What are you looking for?" Daniel thought carefully. "I'm a single father who's learned to be emotionally present. I'm a man who's processed his grief enough to move forward without betraying his past. I'm someone who values genuine connection over performance. And I'm looking for someone who can see all of that and choose me anyway, without me having to pretend to be anything other than exactly who I am. That's good self-awareness. It cost me everything to learn it. But you did learn it. That counts for something." 2 years after Iowa, Daniel received a LinkedIn message from Hannah Miller. His heart stopped when he saw her name in his inbox, his hands actually shaking as he opened it. "Dear Daniel, I hope this message finds you well. I'm finishing my last semester at Northwestern and starting to think about career opportunities. Your company's agricultural division has an internship program I'm interested in applying for, but I wanted to reach out first to make sure my application wouldn't make things awkward. I've maintained professional distance as we agreed, but this opportunity is genuinely valuable for my career goals. Would you be comfortable with me applying? No pressure to say yes. I have other options, but I wanted to ask directly rather than surprise you. I hope you and Ethan are doing well. Regards, Hannah. Daniel read the message 5 times, parsing every word for subtext, trying to understand what she was really asking. Was this just professional courtesy, or was it also an olive branch? Was she testing whether he'd respect her boundaries, or was she opening a door she'd previously closed? He spent an entire day crafting his response, writing and deleting dozens of versions before settling on something honest and direct. Hannah, thank you for reaching out. I'm so glad to hear you're finishing your degree and pursuing career opportunities. Please absolutely apply for the internship. Your application will be evaluated on its merits without any influence from me, positive or negative. I've actually recused myself from that division's hiring decisions for exactly this reason, so you don't need to worry about awkwardness. I respect the boundaries we established and won't use your employment as an excuse for personal contact unless you initiate it. I'm proud of everything you've accomplished, and I hope Northwestern has been everything you hoped for. Ethan and I are doing well. He asks about you occasionally, but understands you're building your own life. All my best, Daniel. Her response came 3 hours later. Thank you for the clarity and for respecting my boundaries. That means more than you know. I'll submit my application through proper channels. And Daniel, I'm glad you and Ethan are well. Really glad. 3 months later, Hannah joined Reed Agricultural Holdings as an intern in the Sustainability Division, working on projects related to small farm support and economic development, a perfect fit for her background and skills. Daniel kept his distance, trusting the program directors to manage her internship without his interference. He saw her name on project reports occasionally, noted her sharp insights and practical recommendations, felt proud of her success without claiming any credit for it. They didn't see each other in person for the entire first month of her internship. Reed Agricultural was large enough that avoiding someone was easy if both parties committed to it, but Daniel heard about her through office gossip, how brilliant she was, how dedicated, how the directors were already talking about offering her a full-time position after graduation. Then one afternoon, Daniel was walking through the building's main lobby when he saw her. Hannah Miller, standing by the reception desk in professional clothes, her hair pulled back, looking confident and capable and utterly transformed from the woman he'd known in Iowa. She was laughing at something the receptionist had said, her face bright with genuine happiness. She saw him at the same moment he saw her. Their eyes met across the marble expanse, and time seemed to suspend. Daniel saw surprise flicker across her face, then something more complicated, recognition, maybe, or acknowledgement, or memory of everything they'd been and everything they'd chosen not to be. He nodded once, a gesture of respect and greeting with no expectation attached. She nodded back, then returned her attention to the receptionist. Daniel continued walking, his heart pounding, but his resolve firm. He'd promised to let her build her life without his interference, and he meant it. Even if she worked in his building, even if they occasionally crossed paths, he'd respect her autonomy completely. 2 weeks later, he received an email to his personal account, not his work one. From Hannah. Daniel, I've been working at your company for 6 weeks now, and I need to tell you something. I've been avoiding saying this because I was afraid of what it might mean or what you might think it meant. But I'm learning that honesty matters more than safety, which is something you tried to teach me through your spectacular failure at it. Here's the truth. I've forgiven you. Not because you earned it or because enough time has passed, but because holding on to that hurt was preventing me from moving forward completely. I've built an incredible life for myself, school, career, friends, independence, all of it, and I'm genuinely happy, probably happier than I've ever been. But there's this space in my life where you used to be, or where the idea of you used to be, and I don't know what to do with it. I'm not asking to get back together. I'm not saying we can pick up where we left off, or that I trust you again, or that the lies don't matter anymore. But I'm saying that maybe we could be friends, real friends, without romance or complication or unspoken expectations. 2 people who learned hard lessons together and came out the other side better for it. Would you be interested in that? No pressure. I'll understand if you say no, but I wanted to offer the possibility. Hannah. Daniel read the email 10 times, his emotions churning through hope and caution and careful consideration. Friends. She was offering friendship, not reconciliation, not romance, but genuine connection without the weight of everything they'd been before. He took 2 days to respond, talking it through with his therapist and Marcus, and even obliquely with Ethan. Daddy, if someone hurt you but then learned and changed, would you be friends with them? Ethan had asked during their Saturday morning pancakes. If they'd really changed, and if being friends wouldn't hurt either of us, yes, I think I would. Because forgiveness is about letting go of hurt, and friendship is about choosing to see the good in someone. Then you should be friends with whoever you're thinking about. How do you know I'm thinking about someone? Because you have your thinking about hard things face on. Daniel had laughed and ruffled his son's hair, marveling at his perceptiveness. Finally, he wrote back to Hannah. Hannah, thank you for your honesty and for your forgiveness, neither of which I deserve, but both of which I'm grateful for. I would be honored to be your friend, with all the boundaries and clarity that entails. I've spent the last 2 years learning how to be genuine without deception, how to be present without performance, how to connect without manipulation. I think I'm finally ready to put those lessons into practice. So yes, let's be friends, real friends, with no hidden agendas or unspoken hopes. Let's prove that something honest can grow from dishonest beginnings, even if it's not romantic. That feels like the right kind of ending, or maybe the right kind of beginning. Daniel. They started carefully. Coffee once a month in the building's cafe, conversations that stayed firmly in present tense without dwelling on Iowa or hurt or complicated history. Hannah told him about school, about the projects she was working on, about her apartment and her friends, and the life she'd built. Daniel told her about Ethan, about therapy, about the work he'd done to become genuinely emotionally available. You're different, she observed during their third coffee meeting. Less careful, more actually present. I learned from the best disaster of my life. That's one way to frame it. How would you frame it? Hannah considered carefully. I'd say we were both trying to become people we hadn't learned how to be yet. You were trying to access authenticity through deception, which obviously didn't work. I was trying to accept invisibility as my natural state, which also didn't work. We collided at exactly the wrong moment and hurt each other in exactly the right ways to force real growth. That's very generous. It's honest. I'm learning that honesty matters more than generosity. Their friendship deepened slowly over months. They discovered they could talk for hours about agricultural policy, economic development, sustainable farming practices. Hannah's insights from actual farm life combined with her business education made her invaluable to Reed Agricultural's mission, and Daniel found himself genuinely respecting her intellect and perspective without any romantic undertones complicating the dynamic. Ethan was thrilled when Daniel finally told him Hannah was back in their lives, though he was initially confused about the just friends designation. But you love her, Ethan said with 8-year-old certainty. I do love her, but there are different kinds of love, buddy. There's romantic love, and there's friendship love, and there's family love. Hannah and I have friendship love now, which is just as valuable as any other kind. But do you still have the romantic kind too? Daniel considered lying, protecting his son from complicated truths, but he'd committed to honesty years ago. Probably, somewhere underneath the friendship. But I'm not acting on it because that's not what Hannah wants or needs. And real love means wanting what's best for someone, even when that doesn't include you romantically. That sounds hard. It is, but it's also the right thing. You're good at right things now, Daddy. I'm trying, buddy. Every day I'm trying. 3 years after Iowa, Hannah invited Daniel and Ethan to her graduation from Northwestern. They sat in the audience watching her cross the stage, accepting her degree with a smile that could have powered the entire stadium. Afterward, she introduced them to friends she'd made, people who knew her only as Hannah Miller, brilliant student and future agricultural policy expert, with no knowledge of farms in Iowa or families who'd treated her like property. These are my friends, Daniel and Ethan, she told them. They're really important to me. Friends. Not, this is the man who lied to me, or this is my boss, or this is complicated history. Just friends, which somehow felt like the most honest thing anyone had ever said about them. That evening, they took Hannah to dinner to celebrate. Daniel, Ethan, Marcus, and Sarah, this strange chosen family that had formed from grief and mistakes and the slow work of becoming better people. Ethan told terrible jokes. Marcus gave a mock-serious toast. Sarah teared up watching Hannah bloom in her hard-earned confidence, and Daniel sat back, watching it all, feeling genuinely happy for the first time in years. "Thank you for this," Hannah said later, walking Daniel and Ethan to their car. "For celebrating with me. For being here without making it weird or complicated." "Thank you for letting us be part of it," Daniel said. "For trusting me enough to be your friend after everything. You earned that trust back slowly, which is how trust actually works." "I'm still learning that lesson." She smiled. "Aren't we all?" Ethan hugged Hannah goodbye with the unselfconscious affection of childhood, and she hugged him back, ruffling his hair in a gesture that was sisterly rather than maternal. They drove home through Chicago's glittering streets, and Daniel felt something settle in his chest. Not closure exactly, but acceptance. He'd lost the romance but gained something more durable. He'd destroyed one kind of connection but built another, more honest one in its place. "Daddy?" Ethan said as they pulled into their building's parking garage. "Yeah, buddy? I think this is a good ending." "What do you mean?" "For you and Hannah. I used to think you'd get married and she'd be my mom, but now I think being friends is better. Because you're both happy like this, and being happy is more important than being romantic." Daniel pulled into their parking spot and turned to really look at his son. 8 years old now, gap-toothed smile replaced with growing-up teeth, Caroline's eyes looking out at him with wisdom beyond his years. "You're absolutely right, buddy. Being happy is more important than being romantic. Plus, you're a pretty good dad now. You don't need someone to help you anymore." "I appreciate the vote of confidence. But Daddy, someday when you're ready, I think you should try dating someone. Like, for real dating, not the fake kind you did before. Because you deserve to be romantic happy too, not just friend happy." Daniel's throat tightened. "When did you get so wise?" "I learned from watching you mess up and then fix it." They went upstairs, and Daniel tucked Ethan into bed, reading stories and doing terrible voice acting until his son's laughter faded into sleepy contentment. Then he sat in his study, looking at the photograph Hannah had sent 3 years ago, her standing at the ocean with arms spread wide, and understanding that Ethan was right. This was a good ending, not the ending he'd wanted when he'd driven to Iowa as Luke Carter, desperate and lonely, and convinced he needed to hide himself to be loved. Not the ending he'd imagined during those weeks on the farm when Hannah had brought him dinner and made him feel human again. Not even the ending he'd hoped for during the terrible drive to the ocean when he'd known they were saying goodbye but hadn't fully accepted it yet. But a good ending nonetheless. Hannah was thriving in the life she'd built. Daniel had learned to be genuinely present with his son. They'd forged a friendship built on honesty instead of deception, on mutual respect instead of manipulation, on hard-earned trust instead of romantic fantasy. And maybe someday, Daniel would be ready to date again, to meet someone as his authentic self, without pretense or performance, and build something real from the beginning. Maybe he'd find romantic love again. Or maybe he wouldn't. But either way, he'd be okay. He had Ethan. He had genuine friendships. He had work that mattered. And he had the knowledge that he'd learned from spectacular failure and become a better person for it. 6 months later, Hannah accepted a full-time position at Reed Agricultural Holdings, working on small farm sustainability initiatives. She moved into a larger apartment, adopted a cat named Ocean, and started dating someone from her graduate program. A kind man who treated her with respect and appreciation she deserved. Daniel was happy for her, genuinely, completely happy, without the bitter undertones of what might have been. He'd moved past that, moved into genuine friendship that didn't require hidden hopes or unspoken expectations. And one Saturday morning, making pancakes with Ethan while discussing their plans for the day, Daniel realized something profound. He was no longer performing happiness or connection or presence. He was simply being those things, authentically and without pretense. Luke Carter had been a fiction designed to access authenticity. But Daniel Reed had finally learned to be authentic without the fiction, to be vulnerable without deception, to connect genuinely without manipulation. "Daddy, you're smiling at the pancakes," Ethan observed. "That's weird." "Sorry, buddy. I was just thinking about how far we've come." "From where?" "From the place where I thought I needed to pretend to be someone else to be worthy of love." Ethan considered this seriously. That was a dumb place. It really was. "But you left it, so that's good." "Yeah, that's really good." They ate their pancakes, only slightly burned this time, and Daniel felt grateful for the long, difficult journey that had brought him here. Grateful for Hannah's forgiveness and friendship. Grateful for Ethan's resilience and wisdom. Grateful for Marcus and Sarah and everyone who'd supported him through his reconstruction. And grateful, in a complicated way, for the mistakes he'd made. Because those mistakes, as painful and destructive as they'd been, had forced him to become someone capable of genuine connection. Someone who could love without performing. Someone who could be present without hiding. Later that day, Daniel took Ethan to the lake, and they stood at the water's edge watching waves lap against the shore. It wasn't the ocean Hannah had dreamed about, but it was vast enough to make their problems feel small, real enough to remind them that beauty existed without manipulation or pretense. "Daddy?" Ethan asked, taking his father's hand. "Yeah, buddy? I'm really proud of who you became." Daniel squeezed his son's hand, feeling tears prick his eyes. "I'm really proud of who we're becoming together." They stood there, father and son, watching the water and understanding that some endings were really beginnings, that some losses created space for better things, and that love, the real kind, the kind worth having, required nothing more than showing up honestly, wholly, completely yourself. That was the lesson Iowa had taught him, the lesson Hannah had taught him, the lesson he was still learning every day, with every choice to be authentic instead of careful, vulnerable instead of protected, genuinely present instead of performing presence. It was the hardest lesson he'd ever learned, and the most valuable. And standing there at the lake with his son, Daniel Reed finally understood. He was enough. Not because of his wealth, or his company, or his tragic backstory. Not because he'd learned to perform worthiness, but simply because he was trying every day to be honest and present and real. That was all anyone could ask. That was all anyone needed to be. That was enough.